There has only really been one story in town over the last 48 hours. The latest dump of Epstein documents has revealed all kinds of dubious behaviour. From Andrew Mountbatten Windsor looming over the prostrate body of a young woman lying on the floor, to Peter Mandelson photographed in a hotel room with a woman in a bathrobe. He isn't wearing any trousers. Another woman's come forward to say that she was trafficked by Epstein, sent to the UK to hook up with Andrew. He denies all wrongdoing, but it is serious and salacious and sordid stuff, and it just keeps coming. And whilst we've heard accounts and denial from many powerful people included in the files, a vast amount of headlines and coverage follows the downward spiral of these men. But this is a story of the women and girls, and every day that Epstein, his cohort and their actions dominate the news is a difficult day for anyone whose life has been dominated by the actions of men like him, if not Epstein himself. In November, a group of nearly 30 Epstein survivors put out a statement called What We're Bracing For, warning that they were facing threats of harm, including death threats and victim blaming. How can their stories not carry as much weight, and why is there still a sense that these women should not be believed? Let's talk to Lucy Duckworth, who is Policy Advisor at Survivors Trust. A very good afternoon, Lucy. There is so much discussion of the part powerful men have played in Epstein's world. Do you feel that the voice of the victims is quite drowned out by this at the moment?
I think so. I think we're only covering the stories when we're talking about people or men in power. And that's understandable. We want it to be shocking if it was in plain sight. But we do need to remember the absolutely horrific figures that are with us even today. I mean, it still breaks my heart every time I say this, that a child is sexually abused in this country every single minute. This is happening now. This isn't in the past. So we have a real duty of care to learn and listen to these victims and put prevention techniques in place immediately. And that's something that we're failing to do.
Do you think some of this is because it is simply easier to talk about these men to avoid talking about the detail of what some men might do?
Of course, and what we're trying to do here is create a hierarchy of trauma. And we're saying that if you're abused by somebody who is very famous and who has a fancy title, then your trauma will be worse than if you're abused by somebody who isn't a public figure. And of course, we know that not to be true. When you say that out loud, it's obviously farcical. What we do know to be true is that we do have a society that normalises this to such an extent that famous people and people with powerful positions and with titles that sound very grand were enabled and facilitated and allowed to carry out these crimes that have lifelong impact on the victims. And while there's a lot of talk about why didn't we do more and why are we not taking away titles and peerages, we can do that, and that's absolutely right. But is that going to address the trauma that the victims and the survivors are experiencing? And currently, while that isn't funded, the answer is no.
Sure.
So there is a lot that the government can be doing. And I would really like to see the conversation move away from who it was as to what we can do to help the survivors and what we can do to prevent more survivors being created, as they are every single minute.
And of course, there is an opportunity for those who might have been in Epstein circles, whether or not they have full culpability for any of those actions, to bring exactly that kind of point to a table. That's not happening either, is it?
It's not. I mean, we've got a new law coming through this year, which is called mandatory reporting. So those who know or suspect child abuse in regulated activities, so that's like teaching or in the church, they must report. And we don't have that in place now, but that wouldn't cover this situation. And so, yes, there's lots of people who for a very long time have known what has been going on. Maybe they chose to look the other way and tell themselves a narrative that was more comfortable, but they failed to act. And in doing so, they have enabled more suffering and prolonged suffering.
There's something that needs to be said also about believing women. And I mean, I sometimes think that broad brush of that phrase is an unhelpful one. But in these instances, and as these 30 Epstein survivors said when they called their statement what we're bracing for, the fact that you might be doubted, that you might feel that you would have to go to court, you'd have to stand up your own story, you wouldn't be believed when you're telling your truth. Can you just explain the damage that that can do to somebody?
Any form of sexual abuse, you are betrayed in the worst possible way. You are told one thing is true and something else happens, and that is then the case as we disclose. We're not going to encourage people to disclose and get the help they need and get the support they need and be believed until we sort out the accountability, because currently, it's very widely reported the criminal justice system just isn't coping. It's not fit for purpose when dealing with any form of sexual assault, because at the moment we have only 1.6% conviction rate of those who end up in court, and it's hugely underreported. I mean, the figures speak for themselves. Every day in this country, every 11 minutes, an adult is raped. And as I said earlier, 500,000 children every single year, that's one a minute, experience sexual abuse. Our society, our systems aren't set up to cope with that. So we need a complete reset, and we need safety by design across all our frontline services. We need to make sure that we are seeing this as the crime it is and the impact it has, and making sure that those victims get full support throughout their life, whether it's in healthcare, education and employment, because these are all areas that are hugely affected by experienced sexual abuse.
And can we talk about exactly that point throughout somebody's life? I did hear somebody at the weekend say of this latest woman who has said that she was brought to this country to hook up with Andrew. It was Jeffrey Epstein who had effected that introduction. And I did hear somebody say, well, why would it take somebody so long to come forward and tell their story, i.e. there's something dubious about that claim. But it can often take women an awfully long time to talk about this.
So it takes about 25 years for a woman to disclose any form of sexual violence, no matter when that happened, and that rises to 36 years for men. Put simply, because of that attitude, we don't feel safe coming forward, because people are going to say, well, did it really happen? And also because when you do come forward, a lot of the symptoms of abuse, so maybe you did have a substance misuse issue, maybe you weren't able to finish school or education, maybe all those things are put against you as if it's a bad character, when actually we're seeing them as a reason for perhaps somebody might have so-called made that up. But actually what we know that to be is that that's a symptom of the trauma. And we shouldn't be judging people for what has happened since the abuse, nor should we be investigating that. We need to be meeting survivors where they are now. We need to be properly funding their support permanently and effectively. I mean, we have agencies that have had to close their waiting list. We've got survivors waiting 1, 2, 3 years just to get support. This has to change now if we're going to really make this the priority in public life that both the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have promised it will be.
Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor both struggled with voluntary apologies for very different things, for different levels of involvement, and we are obliged to say that no wrongdoing has been admitted. What part can an apology play in a woman or a man's ability to move forward?
I can't possibly say that because it's subjective for each person, but an apology is, for many of the survivors we work with, an apology is an essential part of healing, the acknowledgement that it wasn't their fault and that wrong was done. But I think much wider than that, the acknowledgement that there are institutional-wide, society-wide cuts, and that it wasn't just that they weren't believed and that the person who abused them is denying it. It's that the authorities were, and that time and time again they were constantly told they were lying, or they weren't believed, or they weren't given the support they need. That's where the apology comes, because that constant rejection is what can really cause the damage, and that's what needs to change. And I think we're seeing a lot of this, like, well, let's make sure that X, Y and Z gives back a peerage, or let's make sure that they don't have their titles, or that they move, or that they give some money somewhere. But actually, an apology is only as good as its meaning. So if you're truly sorry, then these institutions would be throwing all the resources they possibly can at making sure this doesn't happen again.
Sure.
And that's not what we're seeing.
After, when he was, Prince Andrew had given that interview to Newsnight, when he finally did come to an apology, he said that he wanted to spend some time working with charities who were dealing with victims of sexual abuse. I mean, would you ever want somebody like that working for you or alongside you?
I mean, again, it's what the charities need, isn't it? If charities are saying this is what we need, then that's what they should be given. I haven't heard any comments of people saying they need particular individuals being their ambassador or supporting them in that way. That's not what we need. The agencies we work with are so busy doing the life-saving work that no other statutory service is able to do, that they haven't got time to have these conversations and to be worrying about reputations. And I think that that's a really important point. This shouldn't be about the accused. This needs to be about what the victims and survivors want and need. And right now, those needs across the board aren't being met.
Are you hopeful for change?
I am hopeful for change because I think that we're having this conversation. I'm really grateful for you covering this in such detail, and we're moving away from focusing on the individuals, which is really helpful. I'm hopeful for change because ministers have promised it lots of times, but the reason we find this subject so hard to tackle is because it is everywhere. And we would like to say, oh, it's only those people that abuse and it's only those people that experience it. And we just know that isn't true. Whether you experience sexual violence, it doesn't care about your background, your affluence, your job, if you're a child, what school you went to, it doesn't care. It can affect anybody. And that is really horrific for us to sit with. And that's why it's really hard for us to get a grip with it. So we need some really courageous policy makers who are actually going to make the changes needed. We know what those changes are. We've had multiple inquiries and we've got the blueprint for change. We just really need some front bench ministers to truly get behind it. Sure.
And these stories that are circulating at the moment, they do provide an opportunity for more of us to be having these conversations, don't they?
They do. But what they really do provide an opportunity for, and sorry to go back to something negative again, is there will be survivors up and down the country reading this that will be reminded of their own experiences, regardless of whether that was by someone famous, and might be feeling really alone. And I want them to know that they're not. There is help out there. I mean, we at the Survivors Trust, we have agencies working around the country to support people. And so do please visit our website and make sure that you aren't suffering this alone. Because as I said, we know that disclosing sexual abuse takes decades for many people. That's not anybody's fault, but that's a reality. And we're here to try to change that and offer the life-changing support that we know is needed.
I'm very glad you said that at the end. So Survivors Trust is a very, very simple Google search that you could do, whatever search engine you choose, actually. And Lucy, we hugely appreciate your talking to us today. That's Lucy Duckworth, who is Policy Advisor at Survivors Trust.
It is 18 minutes past 3 now.